Guys, thanks for joining us here and also talking on this topic. It's great to be able to sort of provide this platform here. What I do want to do is just start out just with a general snapshot of where you guys are in your organizations and just seeing where you're at today. So Danni, we'll start with you. What's happening at CVS and where are you today?
It's pretty dynamic for sure. So we are 10,000 stores strong. And over the course of the last 18 months under brand new leadership, so CVS is now headed by by Karen, right? So we've got a female lead, and also CVS Pharmacy, the pharmacy perspective of the business is also being led from the female side. So we've got a lot of diversity and inclusion happening really at the both retail and then overall at the big organizational side. So it's and there's a lot happening. I mean, we've got this integration of healthcare into the retail environment. We've got obviously the COVID response, right? So that's happening across the board. It's impacting everything from the store base to how do we infiltrate into the communities? What's it look like? How is that inclusion happening? So it's busy. And then, of course, my dynamic is to cover design and construction across the board. So I work everything from retail all the way to the Aetna side, right. The portfolio.
Okay, great. Right, Bernadette, would like to just provide a snapshot of where you guys are at and yeah.
Yeah, well, public storage, we're now 2,700 properties. One of the largest landlords in the country right now based off of total customers. We are now in 39 states, actively growing our pipeline for new development, commercial conversions, third-party management, and acquisitions. We just can't keep up with the volume of work at this moment in time. From a diversity aspect, right now we are nearly 70% women for our entire company. Almost 40% are in manager or director levels and above. And our minority representation is 53% across our entire company. And right now, which is fantastic as a company, we're just right now reflecting how can we do better with the traditional departments like real estate, which encompasses construction and design, which is not reflective of our diversity numbers right now in our company, and also looking at what can we do and trickle that down to our vendors.
Thank you. And Ed, round it down. Yeah.
It's always so awesome to hear people talk about how big their organization is because we're 140 stores, not 10,000. And we're a very young company. We're 21 years old, so super young, great bones. And the fun part about Floor & Decor every day is the fact that we literally change the organization all the time. And so we're very early on in our DE&I mission. After the George Floyd incident, feels like a couple of years ago, but wasn't that long ago. Our CEO just kind of laid his heart on the line and said, I'm looking for help. Any way you guys want to help, however you want to change the organization. And they put together these panels where every person from every organization within the company had to have a representative. And I don't think I quite volunteered, but I was voluntold that I was going to be a part of the group. So, and it was amazing because we got to work on issues outside of construction and real estate, which is so easy to kind of focus in on because there's so much work to do. And so, we literally, they allowed a construction guy to create an internship that was not necessarily in construction. So, it was one of those things where we were saying, we are a diverse company from a Floor & Decor standpoint, but there were areas where we were not. And so, as an organization, it was, hey, Ed, what do you think makes sense here? What was your experience coming into the organization, which no one had ever asked me that before. And so, to be able to kind of lean into that and say, this is what would have been great for me coming in. Here's what I would have liked as a 19, 20-year-old architecture major coming into an organization, was one of those things where, Floor & Decor listened. They allowed us the flexibility to go out and use our experiences to start this, really cool recruiting program where we partnered with Howard University and Hampton University, two of the most historical black universities in the country. And we created an internship by which they would send interior designers, architecture majors into our stores who needed designers that were more qualified for these new programs that we were rolling out to help people change their spaces. And these students got to learn how to use software. They got to learn how to use real world experience as a, not, kind of the pie in the sky design, but here's what someone will actually buy, and then they'll actually walk into our stores. And I think the biggest sell we had was $40,000 from one of these 18-year-old students. And it was really cool to kind of see them, pull it all together. Some of the thank yous we got, because these students had never really gotten these kind of chances from an organization like ours. So, like I said, we all got a chance to lean into it. We're trying to roll it out nationwide. I was not volunteered or voluntold for that, so I'm going to step back and start back doing construction things. But that's where we are.
I think the main point that you're talking about is the commitment at the executive level. As soon as the executive team leans into it, right, as soon as they start to really have a commitment around what this is going to look like, they don't necessarily have to know the ins and outs, whether it's an internship program or it's inclusion at the community level. Or if it's it's one of our own CRGs, right? But this becomes something that they're committed to, and there's passion around it, and then it's people, that pick it up and move it forward.
It becomes sustainable like that.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the importance of having the executive leadership team come on board for this, and you mentioned the events of the last year and how that had an effect on what you guys did. So can you talk to? I'll open this up. What was the effects of everything that we saw in the US around the world last year on this issue? And where are we at now, about a year on?
Well,
You want to start?
yeah, for us was actually pleasantly surprising. We weren't quite sure how candidates were going to be reacting to it all. For a very long time, our design and construction development team, we actually had a hard time breaking the barrier of getting diverse candidates to even apply. And during this pandemic, we actually saw an increase of that, which was fantastic. Now, there's a shortage of people still. We're all facing that right now and trying to recruit people to our respective companies. But that was one of the biggest things that we saw. There was diverse candidates actually being interested, and I think it could be because we're now opening up. You can work remotely. You're not forced to work only in our local corporation, corporate offices. We're not exactly sure what, but I think also the flexibility of working from home. One thing that we saw a huge gap on is, from a recruitment standpoint, was middle management, especially with women in the construction and design fields, because mostly during that time there's family planning involved. And a lot of those types of candidates were not applying to our work, or they were taking a step back, or what have you. Giving that hybrid flexibility of working from home, going to visit job sites, and having working remotely and handling meetings that way actually opened up those doors, and we're actually seeing a lot more candidates that they got ghosted because of their own respective career choices return back to the workforce. So for us, it's been very exciting to see that. I just want more candidates.
I think for us, it was so our diversity efforts across CVS Health they're huge, right? It's Goliath in proportion. And for us, what we saw the company do was push a lot to the different community resource groups, right? So the CRGs got engaged, got involved, and each of our departments actually took a stake in it, right? So I think the events over the last 18 months or so really kind of challenged us from a perspective of having a very mature type of organization that responds to it, right? So we had goals already set, and we had certain spend requirements already in place. We had a lot of that discussion going on, but what it did for us is it refreshed that conversation, right? All of a sudden, we had much more dynamic and courageous conversations internally to us, and it became not just about what we've been doing and what's been successful for us, but really kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. Like, are we really doing enough? Is there enough happening that we can really say that we are being inclusive, right? And we started talking about privilege, and we started talking about the opportunities and just what our own expectations were. For me, I'm a female in the construction industry, and I don't know that I came to the table with the same mindset as somebody I was interviewing, right? And so we really started to push more. Like, how do we have more of those courageous conversations right at the interview level? Do we push it to our vendor network? So for us, we have a GC spend requirement, right? For every contract, there's an actual goal, a percentage, and we track it. You have to report in. And this year we got even more forceful in saying how important this was to us, right? So now you're putting at jeopardy your relationship with us if you're not meeting that spend. And we had a lot of people push back. They were like, there's a dynamic, there's a relationship at stake here. How can you possibly do that? And what we came back and said was, if the relationship is important, you're going to realize how important this is to us. And you're going to come along for it. And then we got on board with helping them figure out how to have subcontractors that became more diverse and how to increase that spend. And really saw the numbers kind of move in a completely different direction.
I think it was very tragic, but what came out of it was the permission to have these conversations, right?
Exactly it.
It's not it's not a topic that's new. Right? It's always been there, but it's just that ability to have the conversation. I mean, we would have these panels of 20, 30 people, and it would get emotional. I mean, and what I always appreciated about it was that everyone was honest, right? And it gave us the ability to see the world from someone else's perspective. I've had people come up to me afterwards and go, man, I never knew that. Like, I never knew that happened to you. Or I never knew you experienced that. Or this is how you see these things. And it wasn't that I was looking for, a handout or any kind of emotional tie. It was really just, I want you to see me that I am a sum total of my experiences, right? This is what I come to the table with. You tell me yours, and then we'll still work together, right? We'll still accomplish things, but now I know you better as a person. And I think that empathy allowed people to really bring that to the table when they started to recruit. And what I've noticed is, you start to look at the new hire list. I never looked at it before, but now when you're part of DE&I, you do. And it's so cool to see different names and different faces that I don't think we would have saw 2 years ago, right? And our stock price is still going up. Nothing ever changed from a business perspective, right? Because if you have strong operations and you have good bones, you always, the bottom line is the bottom line. I personally think that it's gotten better because we're more committed, not only to the customer, we're committed to the people who work for us.
So this is my concern then. So, these events have, I guess, triggered this chain of events which have led to some really positive outcomes, and we're having conversations that normally wouldn't happen. I mean, this is a perfect example of that, right? It's set in motion some things that never would have happened before. My concern is what happens now? There's this propensity of brands or companies to get motivated by something that happens, and then everyone's for it, and then society the attention of society gets siphoned elsewhere.
Yeah.
So what are all of your takes on how do we keep the pressure on here? How do we keep the momentum here to not just keep this in the forefront of how we're thinking, but also to get the benefits from that as well moving forward?
Yeah.
For Floor & Decor, what we did was we created a DE&I organization. I mean, it's completely separate. And I remember when we were going through kind of what this would look like, and I still smile because I'm still not quite sure why I was in the room. But, it was, I didn't want to commit to it unless it was going to be long-term. I can just go open stores and be fine, right? If it's not going to be long-term, I don't want to commit to it. And everyone in the group felt the same way. And so we set up, a DE&I, wing of the organization that's completely separate, right? They own no business processes. They're only there to watch it and make sure that we're being diverse, equitable and inclusive. I mean, that is their job. That's only their job. And that, to me, when you make the determination that you're going to go out and invest in it, that for me said that this is something that's going to be long term. And so what they're charged with is really working their way out of a job, right? If the process includes, processes that are diverse, that make you more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive, then eventually, it's the process, kind of like what you have, right? It's the process. You don't need anyone to police it at that point, right? And so that's their charge, is to work your way out of a job, to where everything that we do includes, this heritage that we're going to build as a really young company, right? And so when you start at 20 years old, and we think we're going to be here for a really long time, then you know that we're doing it the right way.
So I think this is really an interesting point because it's something that I kind of pondered. I mean, our organization is 20 plus years from diversity and inclusion at the CVS Health level, and then my own department is 10 years this year. And so when I really step back, especially over the last 12, 18 months, and I stepped back and I looked at what we were doing, it is so easy to lose sight of this, the importance of this, when I have initiatives that are coming at us left and right, and we're dealing with a pandemic and just the volume and the scope of what we do every day. And I really stepped back and I was like, we've got to figure out not only how to keep this relevant, right? We got to keep the conversation engaging, and but we have to be new about it as well, right? Like, what's going to be the difference? What are we going to do different this year? And I really challenged our team. So we have some very the team's it's got different points that heads up, the field or the corporate group or whatever, but. I brought them together and we started talking about this, and I was like, we're going to report up into the big organization, but I don't want to report up the same thing. We went out there and we required 10% spend and we required this, right? Like, what are we going to do to really engage this and be different? And started some of these conversations about, like, how can we write a playbook and actually put the playbook out there and say, like, this is what our expectation is and this is what we set in. And we started doing we talk about virtual meetings. We started doing these virtual meetings, and they were pretty interesting. We didn't know how to do them, so we started pulling together suppliers and then we started with the internship piece of it, and then we were like, well, can we get the internship piece engaged with the supplier piece, and so we just started really trying to be more organic in the conversation and the growth of how it looked for us. And I mean, we've had some great success this year, and it's probably one of those things that I'll struggle with next year. Like, what are we going to do to be different? Because I think as you look at this, right, it's constant, right? So we'll go into our 11th year, and I don't want to do the same thing that we did in our 8th year, but I want it to be yet another dynamic conversation.
So they're both further along in that entire process than that public storage. Like, from a hiring perspective for our entire company, it's organically happened, and when we come to take a step back and do like a report card, that's where we landed with really great numbers. Now we're trying to assess where our vendors are. We're trying to assess how do we encourage that diversity in our hires, but our vendors, our suppliers. We don't know what we don't know right now. So right now we're gathering the facts. Now we've discussed affinity groups to help support this growth. For women, for minority, for LGBTQ. There's a plethora of affinity groups that we're debating about, like how do we implement that at public storage? And what we've learned is having that support from the top, going back to the original talking point about that. And really, when do we strike? When do we actually roll that out as a company? The other thing is too that we're trying to be mindful is, like, with all this growth that's happening and all these initiatives that we're doing internally, how do we avoid burnout of our teams? How do we avoid burnout of our people? And we can't just task the same people doing the same initiatives, or like, I'm a minority woman. I should not be tasked with doing this by myself. Who else is going to be in the boat with me to do this? So right now we're developing a plan for our internal group who is currently on board, like our current hires. How do we create an inclusive environment for everyone? How do we recruit, and what is our benchmarking right now for our vendors? So we're not there yet from an internship standpoint, from a vendor standpoint. We know we have great numbers. We just don't know what's the next part. And right now we're in that fact-finding and analysis phase. So hopefully this time next year, I could say, this is where we're at, and this is what we're setting our goals to. But right now, unfortunately, I cannot share that information because we're still gathering that fact.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the spread and where you guys are and how different it is. It's a great contrast. And I just want to take the moment here as well, like, if you have any questions, we can get to them at the end. Just definitely throw your hand up when we come to that, but start thinking about it. I'm just some guy with a bad mustache and mullet combination. So I like to rely on you guys, okay? But look, and you guys mentioned about how much effort is involved in getting these programs off the ground and really truly investing in it. And it's, I guess, how do we get the industry to start really thinking about what the real benefits are here? Because you say it's like there's a lot of burnout. Why do it? And I think there's this notion around this topic that it's just kind of like a tick and flick thing. We do it to keep up appearances. But I mean, we had the town hall today where we talked about how difficult it is to get the next generation in and have the good people to do the job. So I guess, what are we missing out on in store development from not truly investing in this and making it a priority?
Go ahead.
I'm just going to blurt it out. Diversity of thought, diversity of ideas, different perspectives. How do we reach our customers? Like, how are we making the right stores? That's what we're missing out. I mean, we are across 39 states and we service our communities. And if we're delivering a product that the local community doesn't respond to and doesn't use, we're failing as a company. So I think if we do not recruit and bring in the people and we work with the vendors and local communities and create those jobs during construction and then ongoing management, we completely miss the boat. So for us, it's like we'll go obsolete if we don't bring in that diverse thought across the board.
I'll take it one step further and say it makes you local as well. And the slides were up before about be local, right? Be in your community, be part of that fabric of your community. It's the inclusion at that level. I mean, there's a CVS store on every corner, right? And I think about really what does it mean to be part of that community or to be local to those people. And I think it's not, when we talk diversity, when we talk inclusion and equality, you want that to represent at that local level. And it takes it from the design perspective into that built form. And then it's, it's that engagement at the local level, right? So you want to make it applicable, but you want it to represent as well.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better, to be honest with you. These two problems go hand in hand, right? How are we going to build a next generation of construction and design, and how do we be more diverse and inclusive? They go hand in hand. I mean, what we found after bringing the interns in, and they throw up these super cool and crazy designs, and we all turned and looked at each other and go, no one in this room would have done that.
Like, why didn't we think about that before?
Right. And it's because those people were not represented in that room.
That's right.
At all. And so, that's what we found is a diversity of just thoughts. And we're like, man, that's cool. We're actually gonna roll out those designs across the nation. I mean, that's how cool that, that program turned out to be, because we looked at a subset of students that we would have never looked at before, right? We would have went to the huge design houses, and we'd have, Miami and Ohio State, you name it, right? We would have went to just the big guys. We'd have got students from there, and then, we'd have moved on. But we bring in these students, and they, it was so cool because I've never seen so many pair of Jordan 1s in my life kind of walk into this room. And these students were just super, super talented. And they would have never considered us, we would have never considered them, and then here we are, in this room looking at these.
These programs make us, more the students that we weren't touching, the interns that we couldn't get access to, the individuals who they all of a sudden they were like, oh, I want to go check out what their program is. I want to go check out what they're doing, right? So
I always felt like we learned more from them than they learned from us. That was my takeaway.
We became more relevant.
Yeah, we learned that there's a ton of students out there that we're not privy to, and only because we made the choice not to be.
Well, I find that interesting, Ed, when I had conversations with you and just how this program came to be, and you realized, there's all this talk about, there's not a very wide pool of diverse candidates to start with. So, what are you supposed to do? But it's, you guys took a look at that, and you were really shortening the pool. And I think the conversation is like, well, how do we improve our efforts here? And I mean, in your mind, is that an easy win? Are companies just not looking wide enough?
It was a really easy win. I mean, so this is how easy it was. So we had the first meeting we had with him, I kind of walked through, I mean, I think we had 2 slides, right? Because we didn't know what we didn't know, right? So we were trying to figure this all out, piece it together. I went through a couple of slides. Professor Carmichael goes, yes, this will work. And I'm like, but are you sure? Like, there's not a lot of information here. And she goes, well, I'm going to send you my syllabus, right? It was, I think, 14 classes. She goes, I'm going to teach on Tuesday, and then on Thursday, you can do a presentation about whatever it is that I taught that previous week. And I go, okay, I'll go back to my organization, right, which isn't even that big of an organization, and I'll have a designer or you know, a project manager speak to finishes or speak to construction drawings or speak to whatever that is, right? And all we did was invest an hour a week with them talking to a project manager or a designer. And that designer said, you know, you learned about finishes last week, or here's a finish schedule. Here's what the GC looks for. Here's what, you know, here's how this all ties together. And from that, there was trust, right? These guys know what they're talking about, and we would really like to partner with them. And within, I think by the second or third presentation, the group just started to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're like, we have something, right? And then, you know, so that was, you know, at the store level. At the global level, everyone's kind of getting rumblings of this, and then we start to change how we, you know, how we recruit, you know, at the corporate level. So I started to get more diverse candidates, right? So I would, instead of, you know, having, you know, a pile of resumes where everyone looked exactly the same, next thing you know, I went from, you know, 4 candidates that looked the same to 8 candidates that were more diverse, because we opened our eyes, right? It just took us to say, you know, are we willing to take a chance on this candidate? You know, they don't have the same experience. And that's the thing too, right? I tell people this all the time. The reason I am where I am is because someone took a chance on me, right? You don't come into this industry with experience. You just don't. It's not possible. So someone took a chance on me, so I try to do the same thing, right? Do I take a chance on this person that may be a lower level, right? And we bring them in and we start to grow them. And that's what the internship program is. Just, you know, they're at different levels, different starting points, but it's the same thing, right? It's taking a chance on someone that you probably wouldn't have, investing some time in them, and you get a commitment from that person, you know, that you wouldn't get from, you know, kind of hiring the standard.
That reminds me quite a bit of a program. Before my public storage days, when I was a general contractor, we were privately held. A general contractor did a lot of public sector work, which required us to do a lot of diversity and inclusion in regards to training our vendors. And we had to, you know, report percentages to our clients. And what we found is teaching. And we created a small business enterprise where we actually had, you know, at first it was just like we invite local vendors who were either SBE, minority-owned, DVBEs, like you name it in regards to the requirements. And at first it was like we teach them about estimating, like procurements and reading construction documents, basics, and how do you work and how do you apply for work on a larger general contractor scale. And that program was a fledgling program, and as it developed over the years, we have to turn away applicants because we can't keep up with the demands of this basically university that we created. And it's very important that you continue to do that, and we're investigating, should we do that now for our vendor pool with public storage? Like, do we adopt some of those public sector diversity and inclusion initiatives that they've been implemented for the last 15, 20 years into our corporate sector, and how do we do that in a profitable way? But definitely, I encourage you to do that, because for us, like the pool of candidates when I was on the GC side, it tripled.
Right.
The quality of the work that we received from our subcontractor community grew immensely, and we were getting basically the companies representing the communities that we were building, and it really does. Looking back at it, it really does pay like twice as much more than you originally thought. And that's something that we're looking at right now, public storage. Like, how do we embrace some of those and glean from outside influences like the public sector work?
We actually have that university, so we started it a few years back. And it's been awesome, because I think for 2 or 3 years now, we've actually sponsored a small construction company who is, you know, diverse led and diverse owned. and put them through the program at the university, because one of the challenges to all of this is that many times the diverse companies, they're not geared to be able to support us, right? I mean, they don't have the right bandwidth, they don't have the right experience, they can't come in and get the right insurances. I mean, there's all these barriers that we put in place just by being the size of the organization we are. And so what we really did was we created this university, and then we went through this training process, and we said, okay, look, this is what we want you to bring to the table. And these are where the exceptions, and these are how the partnerships work. And we started to open up doors to show them that there was a way to actually engage in something that they felt like they couldn't get to, right? They couldn't reach that mark. And it's been awesome, because it kind of throws the doors open, and whether it be from an internal perspective or from just how you're sourcing your vendors, it just opens up more.
I just want to take a moment here. Any questions at all that anyone would like to?
We have a question down the back.
Yeah.
Let me just bring you the microphone.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I work for Southeastern Grocers. We have 7 associate resource groups, and I co-chair our Women's Development Network. One of the asks we do an annual survey, one of the asks that we did was really around allyship and fostering active engagement with our allies. So what is either one piece of advice that you would give as we try to grow, or a piece of advice to an ally, as we can always be allies for other groups?
It's a great question.
Want to take it first?
To me, that's always a hard question. I've been asked that a couple of times, and I feel like I never really can give a great answer on it. What I would say, so I'm gonna make this a little personal. So for me, I always feel like I need to have a good mix of women on my team, right? It's so easy for me to go out and hire construction guys. It's super easy. And so what I always try to do as an ally is understand the challenges that that person is going to have when they either come into my organization, or if they're in construction outside of my organization, right? And so let me know what you need from me, right? Not me say, you need to do this, right? And so for me, it's always, I want to understand what it is that you're running into, give you some of my knowledge of what what I have done to get around that, and then let you draw your conclusions. And then we're going to go out there, we're going to see if this works, right? And I always think as a guy, just in business, right? Not just construction. This can be, I actually have a few mentees?
Mentees.
There you go, mentees. That are not in construction at all. And it's literally, how do I navigate corporate America? And most of those are women. And it's interesting, kind of, their experience versus my experience. And I always say women have it way harder whenever it comes to corporate America. It's just, it's a different.
No, we don't.
It's a different. It's a different set of problems that I've heard described that I would never experience. And so, that for me, it's just understanding.
So I think I would add to that, being a woman, but also being a minority, listening to the other person. Just because we're women, we may not have the exact same experience. And I think the hardest thing is depending on what other allies you have, them feeling comfortable to open up, right? And that's the hardest thing, is how do you make them feel comfortable, and how do they feel comfortable to open up to share those issues or those circumstances? Sometimes it's just commonalities of the work, which tends to be a little bit, black and white, so to speak, but how we approach it is very different. I learned to ask how and why multiple times. Like I see my godson, he asks why 5, 6, 7 times for the same questions. But you know what? Taking a step back, that's actually very useful, because you don't know what the root cause is. And that's, for me, I think is very important when you partner with an ally, why, and understand. Not because you're questioning them, but just for you to have a better understanding. And that will help peel that layer of the onion away, so you could get to the root of it, so you could be a better ally to them and vice versa.
Yeah, I agree. I think when if I was to offer a piece of insider advice, it would be to step out there and to ask, like, what are you doing, or what's important, or what works for you, or I mean, I can't tell you enough how many times somebody said to me, well, what's so and so doing, or what's this company looking like, or how are they doing it, right? Not because you necessarily need to copy what they're doing or that it's as applicable, but when you talk about allies, there's pieces of it you can take and that you can do, and there's learn from others' successes and learn from their failures as well. I mean, we've gone down paths that have not been as fruitful as we had hoped they would be, or they didn't work out the way we wanted them to. And so when I think about, just the different perspective, it's ask the questions, it's see what else is happening, and then don't be afraid to partner. I mean, when I think about allies, I don't just think about it internal to us, but I think about across organizations. So I just spoke at a JLL event on diversity, and I think about, I partnered with them so that I could understand what they were doing within their organization, massive efforts there. And I came away with a great resource to just, bounce ideas off of, right? Like, is this working for your group? Can it work for mine? It may not be applicable apples to apples, but, you can get there and then, figure out where it goes from there.
Yeah, and one key thing, don't diminutize what they share.
That's right.
Yeah. I would also say this real quick. Share your resources. Right?
Absolutely.
So I have access to senior VPs and and so what I learned is having my mentee, God, why can't I struggle with that? Saying, I'm going to set up this one-on-one meeting with them because I feel like you can gain some knowledge from a conversation with them, right? Not only just me, just having them, and setting that up too, right? And knowing where the matches are, but sharing resources is always a good idea, I think.
Thank you for asking that, and thank you for the advice. I think that's a great note to end on there. And I think those kind of interpersonal relationships and at the grassroots level is where a lot of change happens as well. We tend to think of things being top down, but it's
grassroots.
Absolutely. Guys, look, thank you so much for this conversation. Give them a hand. That's great.